One of the most disturbing and high-profile cases in recent U.S. history, May 23rd, 2024. It all started with a leaked video from a gym. What looked like a normal day turned into the beginning of a horrifying case. In the footage, a 5-year-old boy is seen running on a treadmill. At first, everything seems ordinary until a man approaches. Without warning, he increases the speed of the treadmill. The child starts to struggle. He loses his balance and crashes to the ground. But the nightmare doesn't end there. The man walks over, lifts the boy, and places him back on the still running treadmill. Again, the child tries to run. Again, he falls. This horrific pattern repeats 7 times. 7 times the boy is thrown off the machine. 7 times his small body hits the ground. His head slams into various surfaces. And then the video ends. No one knows exactly what happened to the boy after that. Today we're diving deep into this gut-wrenching case, one that left millions stunned. The story of a helpless child and the man who cruelly abused him. Brianna Mitchell was born on November 7th, 1996 in New Jersey, into a modest everyday family. She had one sister. Her father had left them when she was young. Though he remained a distant presence, appearing from time to time, he never returned to live with them. Up until the age of 16, Brianna's life was relatively ordinary. She faced the usual ups and downs of adolescence, but nothing out of the ordinary. That changed the year she turned 16. A single moment shattered the stability she had known and altered the course of her life forever. Brianna attended a party where she didn't know anyone, a place she was stepping into for the first time. At that party, a boy raped her. The details of the event remain unclear, but Brianna has said, "I didn't know him. I hadn't even spoken to him." The experience left her deeply traumatized. Yet for reasons she never fully revealed, Brianna chose not to press charges. She never spoke to anyone about the assault. Instead, she kept it to herself, alone with her pain. The unspoken truth and a difficult decision. There has been much said about the assault in this case, but one thing is clear. Brianna was underage at the time. A few weeks later, Brianna discovered she was pregnant. At first, she considered aborting the child. She was in a difficult situation, young, frightened, and filled with hatred toward the baby's father for what he had done to her. Despite the odds, she made the decision to carry the pregnancy to term. Brianna's mother told her, "If you want to keep the baby, I won't stop you. It's your decision, but you can't raise the child here. You'll need to find your own apartment." Following her mother's advice, Brianna did just that. With the savings she had, she managed to rent a place of her own and found a job to support herself. The struggles of single motherhood. On May 1st, 2014, Brianna's son, Corey Mitchell, was born. Brianna quickly realized that taking care of a child, especially on her own and without any financial support, was far from easy. She was forced to work 2 shifts to make ends meet. During this time, one of Brianna's friends suggested she use drugs to stay awake longer at night and keep up with her demanding schedule. This friend introduced her to methamphetamine. Brianna thought to herself, "I'll just use it once or twice when I really need to. I won't get addicted. I'll be careful." However, after a while, when Corey turned 4, Brianna had fully transformed into an addicted, independent woman. She has stated that, "I never used drugs in front of Corey, and I made sure he never knew or was affected by it. I always took care of him. I was a good mother, but I had to use drugs to stay on my feet." She insists that despite her addiction, she made sure it didn't affect her son. As Brianna's addiction deepened, her financial situation worsened. She had to pay for drugs, cover expenses for Corey, and handle food and rent. Unable to keep up with the rent, Brianna returned to her mother's house. Her mother's boyfriend and her sister also lived there. Brianna and Corey were forced to live in the basement of the house. Things continued quietly until one day, Brianna's mother told her, "How long are you going to keep living like this? Go take a paternity test, find out who the father of your child is, and maybe get some money from him. Maybe he could help you get an apartment, and maybe you both could live together. At least you'll get some money and your situation will improve." In response, Brianna said, "Do you even understand what you're saying? That person raped me. That person is the reason I'm in this terrible emotional state. I don't want my child to ever know what kind of monster his father is. I'll never do that." Her mother dropped the subject, saying, "Okay." But Brianna decided to gather a bit more money for herself. To do this, she sought assistance from the government, telling them, "I'm a single mother and I want my child to have health insurance, and I also want to receive food stamps for his expenses." The government responded, "As a single mother, you qualify for assistance. But first you need to take a DNA test to determine who the father of your child is." Brianna took the DNA test, and it was confirmed that Corey's father was a 27-year-old man named Christopher Gregory. This meant that at the time he assaulted Brianna, he had been 21 years old. When Christopher found out he had a son, he did everything he could to gain full custody of Corey. Since Brianna didn't have a stable home, a good job, and most importantly was battling addiction, Christopher quickly succeeded in taking Corey away from her. Corey, who was 5 years old at the time, went to live with Christopher. From the court's perspective, Christopher appeared to be a much more stable and suitable parent than Brianna. He came from a wealthy and respected family. His mother was a real estate agent, his father a retired police officer, and Christopher himself was a teacher. Christopher lived in a luxurious home with his parents, and after learning about Corey, he bought a stylish new apartment in New Jersey. The apartment was located in a well-known upscale neighborhood and had all the amenities, including a gym and a swimming pool. In the court's view, it was clear Corey would have a much better life there than in the basement of his grandmother's house. Moreover, Christopher had an impressive educational background. He had recently earned his master's degree in psychology and later obtained a teaching certificate. He taught at both a high school and a university, was an honor student, and had been a football team member during his school and college years. From everyone's perspective, Christopher entering Corey's life seemed like a miracle, the start of a bright and happy future for the little boy. After losing custody of Corey and watching him sent to live with Christopher, Brianna made every effort to turn her life around and get her son back. Her first step was enrolling in addiction recovery meetings, and with incredible determination, she managed to overcome her addiction completely. She eventually secured a better job at a company, but due to her financial situation, she still couldn't afford her own place. Brianna then filed a request with the court to at least be allowed to see Corey. It had been 2 months since she had last even caught a glimpse of him. Finally, the court agreed, but under strict conditions. Since Brianna didn't have her own home, she wasn't allowed to have Corey stay overnight with her. Instead, she was permitted to take him out for a few hours on weekends and then return him to Christopher at a specified time. Any violation of these rules would result in Brianna permanently losing visitation rights. There was one alternative. If Christopher gave explicit permission, Brianna could spend time with Corey inside Christopher's home, allowing her to be with him longer. But taking him elsewhere was strictly forbidden without a stable residence. On October 28, 2020, after months apart, Brianna finally got to see Corey again. They had planned to go out for ice cream, but as soon as Brianna saw him, she noticed something was wrong. Corey's lower lip was split open, and there were bruises on both his hands. Brianna immediately asked, "What happened to you? Who did this?" But Corey said nothing. This silence was completely unlike him. Before, Corey had always shared everything with his mother. They had been incredibly close, spending countless hours together in the basement, talking, playing, and depending entirely on one another. Now he just stood there, silent. Brianna, growing increasingly panicked, couldn't hold herself back. She picked up the phone and called Christopher. When Brianna called Christopher, he brushed everything off. "Nothing happened," he said casually. "We were just playing football. Corey fell. It's not a big deal. Kids fall all the time. It's normal." Then he added, almost mockingly, You had him locked up in a basement all day. Of course he didn't get a scratch back then. Kids need to play. Bruises happen. But Brianna wasn't convinced. Her gut told her something was terribly wrong. She took photos of Corey's bruises and his split lip and sent them along with a detailed letter to Child Protective Services, CPS. She also made several calls insisting something needed to be done. Each time CPS reassured her, "We've added the photos and your concerns to Corey's case file. We're monitoring the situation. There's no need to worry." Still, every time Brianna picked Corey up for their scheduled visits, she noticed new marks on his small body, bruises, scratches. But Brianna wasn't convinced. Her gut told her something was terribly wrong. She took photos of Corey's bruises and his split lip and sent them along with a detailed letter to Child Protective Services, CPS. She also made several calls insisting something needed to be done. Each time CPS reassured her, "We've added the photos and your concerns to Corey's case file. We're monitoring the situation. There's no need to worry." Still, every time Brianna picked Corey up for their scheduled visits, she noticed new marks on his small body, bruises, scratches. Once, there were even claw marks on his chest. Each time, Brianna documented everything, taking photos, writing reports, making calls. But CPS only added notes to the file. No action was taken. Christopher always had an excuse ready. He fell at the gym. He hit the edge of the pool. Kids are rough. It's normal. But in July 2020, things escalated beyond anything Brianna had seen before. When she picked Corey up for their visit, she was horrified. Both of his eyes were blackened, deep bruises under each one, unmistakably from being punched. There was no way this could be explained by a simple fall. On his chest, fresh scratch marks stood out starkly against his skin. This time, Brianna didn't just send photos. She stormed into the CPS office, slammed the evidence down in front of the staff, and demanded action. "I've been calling, writing, sending photos for months," she cried. "How exactly does a child fall and end up with black eyes? Look at him! Just look at him!" Finally, CPS could no longer ignore her. They agreed to send a caseworker to speak directly with Corey, but the meeting was scheduled to happen at Christopher's house, with Christopher present during the conversation. And when the caseworker gently asked Corey what had happened, Corey looked at his father and said nothing. Christopher simply said that Corey had fallen and that it was normal for children to get bruises and scratches. Corey just nodded and confirmed, saying, "Yeah, I fell. My dad is telling the truth." He didn't add anything else. When Brianna found out how the meeting had gone, she went back to Child Protective Services and warned them, "Now Christopher is going to take it out on my son even worse because he thinks he can get away with it." In total, Brianna sent 89 letters to Child Protective Services, each accompanied by photographs documenting Corey's bruises and scratches. On Sunday, March 20th, 2021, Brianna was supposed to pick up Corey and take him to her father's house, Corey's grandfather, for his birthday celebration. They had only a short window of time. The plan was for Brianna to pick Corey up at 7 a.m. and return him to Christopher's home by 2:30 p.m. When Brianna picked Corey up at 7 a.m., he was once again covered in injuries. Sadly, by then, Brianna had become used to seeing her son that way. She took Corey to her father's house, and they spent some time together, eating ice cream, exchanging gifts, and simply enjoying themselves. It was the first time Brianna's father had ever met Corey, and he happily gave him some presents. On the way back to Christopher's place, Brianna got stuck in traffic. Knowing she would be late, she texted Christopher, "We're stuck in traffic. I'll probably be late. I'm really sorry." Christopher responded, "Okay, that's fine. Next time you come to pick him up, I'll be just as late returning him to you." Brianna replied, "That's okay. I'm really sorry. It's out of my control." But then Christopher texted again, angrier, "You really pissed me off. You ruined all my plans. I'll make you pay for this." About half an hour later, he sent another message, "Drop Corey off at the community gym." Normally, when Brianna returned Corey to Christopher, she would walk him all the way to Christopher's apartment door. But this time, as instructed, she dropped Corey off at the gym. This exchange of text messages was later recorded in the official case file. At 4:40 p.m., Brianna arrived at the gym, dropped Corey off, and called Christopher to inform him. Christopher told her to tell Corey to go inside, which she did. Christopher was furious that day. He later admitted it himself. And that day would become infamous because it led to the viral video many people would later see, the video of the little boy on the treadmill. At first, the video looks normal. Corey is running on the treadmill, and Christopher appears to be training him. But then Christopher begins increasing the treadmill's speed. Corey tries to keep up, but it quickly becomes too much. He falls off. Christopher aggressively picks Corey up and throws him back onto the moving treadmill. This happens 7 times. Corey falls and Christopher throws him back on. It's clear from the video that Corey is trying his best, following instructions, but the speed is simply too fast for him. During one of the falls, Corey's head hits the treadmill hard, which would later explain the large swelling on his forehead. Brianna wasn't scheduled to see Corey again for another 5 days after this incident. When she finally did, she immediately realized that something was terribly wrong. Corey's forehead was severely swollen with a huge bruise. He had scratches on his chest and bruises all over his arms and legs. This time, it was undeniable. Corey had been seriously hurt. In the video, you can clearly see the moment when Corey's head violently slams into the treadmill, most likely causing the swelling. Brianna didn't wait. She immediately took Corey, drove straight to Child Protective Services, and demanded, "Look at him. Look at what's happening. What are you going to do now?" Shockingly, they still didn't take immediate action. One employee simply told her, "You shouldn't have brought him here in this condition. You need to take him to a hospital immediately. This is serious." Without wasting a second, Brianna rushed Corey to the hospital. At the hospital, the medical staff immediately grew concerned. First, they suspected possible internal bleeding due to head trauma. They performed a CT scan, ran blood tests, and had several doctors examine Corey's injuries. After several anxious hours, they finally told Brianna that, thankfully, there was no internal bleeding. The injuries were external. The bruises and swelling, while very concerning, were all superficial. While examining Corey, one female doctor gently asked him, "What happened to your head?" Corey replied, "I fell off the treadmill." The doctor then asked, "Why were you running so fast on the treadmill? You have to be careful." Corey told the doctor, "My dad made me get on the treadmill. He thinks I'm too fat." For some reason, Corey trusted this doctor enough to confide in her. He added, "Please don't let me go back to my dad. He hurts me." The doctor later relayed everything Corey had said to Brianna. Upon hearing this, Brianna immediately called Christopher. She told him, "I'm not bringing Corey back today. I had to take him to the hospital. He's not well at all, and now he's been admitted. I can't bring him to you. If you're really that worried, you can come here yourself." Christopher became furious. He yelled at Brianna over the phone, "You had no right to take my son to a hospital. If he needed a doctor, I would have taken him myself. You have until 6 p.m. to return him to me, or I'll sue you." Time passed. 6 p.m. came and went. At 8:30 p.m., Christopher, realizing Brianna still hadn't returned Corey, began calling her repeatedly. He also sent her several threatening text messages. During one of the calls, Brianna's phone battery died and her phone shut off. After that, she had no idea what else Christopher might have done or said that night. Later that evening, when Corey was discharged from the hospital, the doctors assuring Brianna that there was no immediate danger, she took him home with her. At that time, Brianna no longer lived with her mother. She was living with her boyfriend. That night, Corey slept peacefully at Brianna's place. The next morning, Brianna woke Corey up early, gave him breakfast, dressed him, and prepared to take him back to Christopher. Legally, she was still obligated to return Corey to his father. The Child Protective Services in the court had not yet agreed to transfer custody to Brianna, and she feared that if she defied the arrangement, she might lose Corey forever. So she called Christopher to apologize and then drove Corey back to him. That day was April 2nd, 2021. At 2:30 p.m., Christopher called Brianna. His voice was filled with anger and panic. He said, "You did something to Corey. He's really sick. I'm taking him to the hospital." Brianna, shocked, replied, He was fine when he was with me. The doctors just saw him yesterday and said he was fine. What happened to him? She pleaded with Christopher. At least tell me which hospital you're taking him to so I can come and be with him. But Christopher refused to answer. He hung up the phone, and shortly afterward, he turned his phone off. Brianna grew more and more frantic. She left work, rushed home, and began calling every hospital near Christopher's house, desperately asking if a little boy named Corey had been admitted. She even contacted the police saying, "Something is happening to my son, and I don't know where he is." Hours of panic passed. Finally, at 6 p.m., there was a knock on Brianna's door. When she opened it, she was told the news no mother should ever hear. Her son, Corey, was dead. The cause of death was not immediately clear. Multiple catastrophic injuries were found, making it difficult to determine exactly which one had ultimately killed him. The autopsy revealed a fatal head trauma, cardiac contusion, severe damage to the heart caused by blunt force trauma to the chest, liver contusion, a deadly injury that had caused Corey's liver to rupture, acute inflammation and severe sepsis, blood poisoning. Each of these injuries alone could have been fatal. Together, they painted a horrifying picture of the violence Corey had endured. After Corey's autopsy, the exact cause of death remained unclear. It couldn't be definitively determined whether Corey had been murdered or had suffered some kind of accidental trauma. The case remained open, lingering without a final conclusion. However, around that time, a critical piece of evidence surfaced. The police obtained the video of Corey on the treadmill, the footage showing Christopher forcing the little boy to run until he collapsed. This video changed everything. Upon seeing the footage, the authorities immediately arrested Christopher. While Christopher was being interrogated at the police station, another forensic expert was assigned to re-examine Corey's case. This new expert meticulously reviewed all the evidence, the autopsy results, the medical reports, and the circumstances surrounding Corey's death. This time, there was no doubt. The forensic report was amended, officially ruling Corey's death as a homicide. The expert concluded that Corey had died from blunt force trauma to his head, chest, and liver, all deliberate injuries. It was determined that these fatal injuries were inflicted approximately 4 hours before his death. The report also clarified that although Corey had had some older bruises on his body, those were not fatal and had not contributed to his death. In fact, when Brianna had taken Corey to the hospital the day before, doctors had examined him thoroughly and confirmed he was in good health. This forensic expert even dismissed the initial suspicion of sepsis, stating that Corey had been perfectly healthy until he suffered those fatal blows. At this point, Christopher became the sole suspect. Not only was there a violent video showing his abuse, but the timeline and medical findings pointed directly at him. At the time, Christopher was 31 years old. In such cases, the legal system typically prefers to avoid a lengthy and expensive trial. So the prosecution offered Christopher a deal. If he pleaded guilty to charges of negligent behavior and child abuse, he would be sentenced to 30 years in prison without the need for a trial. But Christopher rejected the plea deal. As a result, the case proceeded to court. The first trial was scheduled for April 30th, 2024. Naturally, at trial, Christopher's defense attorneys did everything they could to shift the blame away from him. They focused on Brianna's troubled past, her history of drug use, trying to convince the jury that she or even her boyfriend could have been responsible for Corey's death. After all, Corey had spent the night before his death in Brianna's home, and to the defense team, that made her an easy target. Moreover, Christopher came from a wealthy family. He himself was financially well off, and in cases like this, money can buy a lot of defense. During the trial, Christopher's defense attorney made a surprising move. He distanced himself from Christopher. Standing before the jury, he essentially said, "I'm with you. I'm on your side. This man is a terrible father. He's a disgrace." The lawyer admitted openly, "We've all seen the video." No one denies that Christopher abused his son. He mistreated Corey, and he will rightfully serve time for that. But then he made a critical argument. Yes, Christopher abused Corey. Yes, he forced him on the treadmill and physically harmed him, but none of that is what caused Corey's death. According to the defense, the real cause of Corey's death was Brianna. The lawyer claimed that Brianna had been manipulating Corey, that she coached him to say his father was abusing him, that she took him around showing bruises and injuries that she herself might have inflicted, all in an effort to gain custody. He argued that the only time Corey ever accused his father was once, to a doctor, and there was no record of him consistently saying anything like that elsewhere. In the defense's version of events, Brianna was desperate to win custody back, and she was willing to do anything, even hurt her own child, to make Christopher look like a monster. When Brianna took the witness stand, the lawyer began his cross-examination. He started simple. "Why did you lose custody of Corey in the first place?" he asked. Brianna answered honestly, "I was addicted to drugs. I was homeless at the time." The lawyer continued, "But you got clean later, right? That's how you were able to see Corey again?" Brianna nodded. "Yes, I got clean." The lawyer pressed harder. "And you've stayed clean ever since?" Brianna hesitated before answering. "No. I relapsed a few times." The lawyer's voice sharpened. "When was your first relapse?" Brianna replied, "Probably around December 2020. The lawyer pointed out that during that period, Brianna was allowed supervised visits with Corey. He asked, "Don't you think you should have told Christopher that you were using drugs again while you were seeing Corey?" Brianna said firmly, "No, I didn't feel I had to tell him." The lawyer then delivered his next blow. "Were you high the day Corey died?" Brianna quietly admitted, "Yes." At that point, the defense attorney pulled out a document, a printout of text messages between Brianna and her boyfriend. It showed that on the very same day Corey was dying, at the exact time Christopher was claiming Corey's health was deteriorating, Brianna had texted her boyfriend asking for drugs. In other words, while she was supposedly frantically calling hospitals and the police looking for her son, she was also trying to score drugs. The lawyer asked, "Why were you looking for drugs at a time like that?" Brianna answered, "Because I was falling apart. I knew this man was hurting my son, and I was powerless. I had to send him back to that monster." The next expert witness brought in by the prosecution was the forensic pathologist, the one who had originally concluded that Christopher was responsible for Corey's death. The doctor confirmed that the fatal blows were inflicted 4 hours before Corey's death. When asked about the timeline, the lawyer questioned the certainty of the 4-hour gap. "So you're saying that the blows happened exactly 4 hours before Corey died? Could it have been longer or shorter than that?" The doctor replied, "Yes, it could have been within a window of 4 to 6 hours. The exact timing isn't precise." The lawyer then shifted the focus. "So it's possible that these injuries could have been caused earlier, perhaps by the mother?" The doctor held firm. "In my professional opinion, the injuries Corey suffered were inflicted by the same person who abused him in the treadmill video, his father, Christopher." The next prosecution witness was a forensic expert who had gone through Christopher's laptop. This expert revealed a series of troubling searches that Christopher had made just before Corey's death. On March 25th, 2021, Christopher had searched, "Does redness from a bruise turn into a bruise?" On April 2nd, the day Corey died, "What causes blood sugar levels to rise in white blood cells? Can my car be tracked? Can internal bleeding raise blood sugar? How long after internal bleeding does a person die?" The most shocking search came the day after Corey's death, on April 3rd, when Christopher had searched, "If an autopsy reveals a murder, how soon after can a suspect be arrested?" At the time of Corey's autopsy, the cause of death wasn't yet publicly declared as murder. It was still left undetermined. However, Christopher knew that Corey had been murdered, and just 1 day after his death, he was already searching for information about what happens after a murder investigation. Next witness brought by the prosecution team is a nurse who was on shift the day Christopher brought Corey to the hospital. The nurse says, Christopher had thrown Corey over his shoulder and was acting completely normal, as if the child wasn't in a critical condition. He didn't even tell us that the child was in an emergency situation, but we could tell from Corey's state that something was seriously wrong. We quickly took him to the room, and while we were starting the procedures, Christopher left the hospital. The child fought hard to stay alive. We resuscitated him 3 times. We thought he would survive after the 3rd time. But while we were taking him for a scan, he suddenly passed away. The time of death was 5:03 p.m. After the child died, Christopher returned to the hospital, but when we told him the child had passed, he was initially upset, but then left the hospital again without any significant reaction. After the nurse's testimony, the next witness is David Gregory, Christopher's father, who had worked for the New Jersey Police Department before his retirement. He says, "The first time I met Corey, I was really happy to know I had a grandson. Corey was my only grandson, and I wanted to do everything for him. I had a lot of hopes for him, and now I'm really saddened by his death." He is asked if he knew what Christopher was doing to the child. David answers, "No, if I had known, I would never have allowed Christopher to be alone with him." Then they ask if he has seen the treadmill video. He answers, "No, I didn't watch the video. I didn't want the last image I had of my only grandson to be something like that." The next witness brought by the prosecution is Curlin, Christopher's mother, who worked as a real estate consultant. She says, "A few hours before Corey's death, Christopher called me and said that Brianna had done something to the child and that Corey's condition was bad. I told him to take the child to the hospital. A few hours later, Christopher called me again and said that the child had died. I told him to stay where he was and not to go to the hospital because I knew my son was very sensitive and probably wouldn't be able to handle it in the hospital. It seemed like he wanted to cover up and leave without his son realizing what happened." In the end, on May 31st, 2024, Christopher Gregory is sentenced to 10 to 30 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. The exact length of his sentence remains uncertain, as involuntary manslaughter has been determined, and he may be eligible for parole. Thank you for staying with me through this video. If you haven't liked it yet, don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you in another video and another criminal case. Goodbye.